That night, as I lay in bed in a hotel far from home, it all came back to me like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. 3. In the past 15 years, I've never forgotten what happened, but I've managed to suppress it and not dwell on it. But earlier that night, it was forcefully pushed to the forefront of my mind. My whole body was shaking, only my hands weren't shaking. They were hard as a rock as I held the gun a few inches from her head while she slept in our bed. She was naked, the sheet only covering the bottom of her legs, and I could still see her. It's the oldest cliché in the books, but in my case, it turned out to be true. Husband comes home early from a business trip, catches his wife with another man, etc., etc., etc. I was gone for a whole week and wasn't due back until Friday. But we worked hard and finished late Thursday night, and I was so anxious to get back into Jeanette's waiting arms that I changed my plans and drove home that evening. The first inkling that I was in trouble was when I called home, and Jeanette's voice was panting. There was a sultry slurring in it, as if she were drunk and enjoying herself. That alone would not have made me so suspicious if I hadn't heard the sounds of a baseball game going on in the background. The thing was, Jeanette wasn't much of a sports fan, and she hated baseball, calling it boring. So why was there a baseball game on TV, and quite loudly at that, if I wasn't there? For some reason I can never understand, I made a hasty decision not to tell her I was going home. I just said it like I was doing my usual nightly I love you style phone call like I did every night when I was on the road. Whether or not it would have changed anything, I'll never know anymore. As I turned onto the street where our house was located, I realized that my worst fears had been realized. A strange car I'd never seen before was parked in the driveway, and all the lights in front of the house were dark. My gut told me what was going on, but I needed to see for myself, so I parked on the street and then cautiously and quietly approached the side door, the driveway. It was unlocked, so I silently entered, took off my moccasins, and walked through the back room entrance into the kitchen. As soon as I opened the door, I heard Jeanette and realized she was engaged in some sort of sexual activity. She was moaning in her own special way somehow, not particularly loud but very guttural, very distinct. But I still needed to see, so I crept down the hallway, past the closed door to the bedroom where our 4-year-old daughter, Jamie, I assumed, was sleeping. I tiptoed to our bedroom door and now saw that Jeanette was not alone. I quietly opened the door and was confronted with my worst nightmare. My beautiful wife of 6 years was on all fours and having sex royally with a large man. What's more, he used really degrading words when he had my wife. 3. Then my loving wife ducked her face into a pillow and screamed from a finish more explosive than any I had ever seen her achieve with me. But her lover wouldn't let her off the hook. He picked her up by the hair and continued to taunt her, talking about what a slut she was, and how she was his slut, and how she had proven it the day before. I was literally sickened because I had no idea, not the slightest clue, that Jeanette wasn't completely devoted and faithful to me. Sure, I had traveled a lot in the past year, but when I was home, she was never less affectionate than usual, and our sex life was active, even with a 4-year-old in the house. Heck, we even talked about having another one. An impenetrable darkness descended upon me, but somehow I managed to gather my thoughts just enough not to get into an immediate confrontation. Somehow I had a feeling that this was going to end badly for me. I'm not exactly a wimp, but this guy was probably 5 inches taller than me and weighed a good 40 pounds more, and he seemed to be all muscle. No, I needed an equalizer if I wanted to avenge myself, and at that moment that was the only thing on my mind. And I knew exactly where I could find what I needed. I closed the bedroom door silently. They didn't even know I was there. I slipped out of the house, got back in the car, and drove away. My father was a cop and a gun enthusiast at the time, so he had a lot of pistols, rifles, and shotguns. He taught all 3 of his children, I had an older sister and a younger brother, how to shoot when we were teenagers. Moreover, I knew where he kept the key to his gun safe. And as luck would have it, Mom and Dad were vacationing in the Rockies in their RV, which was his pride and joy. I always had a key to their house so I could feed the dog when I was home and they were traveling, so my showing up at the house, even at this late hour, wasn't overly suspicious. To be honest, at that moment I didn't care if anyone knew what I was doing or not. It didn't matter to me because I wasn't going to be around for it to matter. I was going to take one of Daddy's guns, shoot Jeanette and her lover, if he was still there, and then kill myself. Jeanette's betrayal, coming so suddenly out of nowhere, took away all my will to live. I remember being in a daze when I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house, went inside, turned off the alarm, and went into my father's study. I looked in his desk drawer, found the key I needed, and then went to the gun cabinet. I found the gun I wanted, a 9mm automatic. I took out the clip, found it full, put it in the gun, and slipped it into the waistband of my pants. I was ready. I closed the closet and left my parents' house without even remembering to set off the alarm and drove back to my house. Not once during that whole time did I think about anything other than what I planned to do when I got there. I'm a pretty goal-oriented person, and when I choose a course, I can be relentless in pursuing my goal. I was somewhat disappointed when I saw that Jeanette's lover's car was gone, indicating that he had no intention of staying there overnight. But I just dismissed it. The center of my anger was my wife. Once again, I slipped silently into my house and stood ready to kill the cheating bitch I thought I loved and then end my own misery. Suddenly, I heard a sound behind me, a soft sigh. "Daddy?" Jamie said softly. "Daddy? Why do you want to shoot Mommy?" For some reason, it penetrated through the fog that was my mind, and I realized what I was about to do to my beautiful little girl. I'll never know what made her wake up, what made her get out of bed and come here at this very moment. Divine intervention? That's the only answer that makes sense to me. Suddenly, it seemed to me that everything happened at the same time. Jeanette flinched and woke up, and then screamed when she saw me standing there with a gun in my hand. A second later, I let out an unintelligible scream and threw the gun across the room to smash the picture of our wedding on the dresser, which startled Jamie, and she began to sob. Tears stinging my eyes and Jeanette's screams urging me, "Stop, please let me explain," ringing in my ears. I picked up my daughter, pulled her against me, and rushed to the door. She clung to me with all her might, feeling, I think, that her world was about to be turned upside down. "Where are we going, Daddy?" Jamie asked between sobs. "We're going to Grandpa and Grandma's for the night," I said through my own sobs. "Mommy did something really bad, and we can't stay here. We'll come back tomorrow and get your things, but we have to leave before something really bad happens." And with those words, I burst into sobs like I hadn't sobbed in years. I returned to my hometown for a conference in my chosen field of endeavor, in which I had achieved considerable success. I had ambivalent feelings about coming home. So much had changed in the 15 years since that terrible night when I came close to committing murder-suicide. The city has grown noticeably, but it has left me and my loved ones behind in its wake. Both Mom and Dad are gone. Dad got lung cancer and died 8 years ago, and Mom died mostly of a broken heart just 6 months after Dad. My sister never made this place her home, and my brother left after getting a lucrative job offer on the other side of the country. So after my mom died, I had no reason to go back, and I didn't. Too many bad memories. After the penultimate day of our 4-day event, I was tired of being cooped up in a hotel room, so I decided to venture down to the hotel bar for a couple beers. I have to be very careful about drinking because there was a time when it nearly killed me. But I can handle a couple drinks, and I felt I needed them to relax. As I usually did, I found a corner booth and sat down so that I could see everything in the bar. It was a habit I'd acquired a long time ago, part of the lack of trust issues stemming from my breakup with Jeanette. I was sipping my second mug of beer when she walked in. I mentally berated myself that she had shown up on the one night I'd be at the bar I'd visited, the one and only time I'd returned to my hometown. I knew right away it was her. You can't live with someone, especially someone as beautiful as Jeanette, and not recognize her even 15 years later. I've actually seen her once or twice in the intervening time, but I hadn't seen her since my mother's funeral, and we hadn't spoken then. In many ways, she hadn't changed a bit. She had the same cat-like gait that emphasized her height of 178 centimeters. She had the same red hair, styled the same way, a little below her shoulders, and the same fiery green eyes. But something about her had changed. The only thing I noticed that was different, well, at least the first thing I noticed right away, was that she had clearly enlarged her breasts. They were fuller and thicker than I remembered them, and they bounced freely and easily in her gold lace blouse. She seemed to be looking for someone, and that gave me a chance to take a closer look at her, and what I saw I didn't like. She was wearing quite a bit of makeup, and her relatively short skirt and stockings gave her a slutty look that didn't flatter her. There was also a certain hardness about her, as if she had been through a few hard knocks. After a minute, during which she walked over to the bar and picked up a drink she hadn't paid for, she obviously saw who she was meeting, and I was even less impressed. I recognized the guy from the convention and remembered him as some cocky braggart who fancied himself a ladies' man. But he seemed too soft to be a real player, and if I'm not mistaken, he'd have to pay for the privilege of spending time with my ex-wife. I don't know why I stood up and intervened. Maybe it was an underlying sense of concern for Jeanette. Maybe I was just curious about her, or maybe I just wanted to shake the asshole a little. I nonchalantly walked over to the booth Jeanette had just occupied, leaned over and whispered in the guy's ear. "It's time for you to go, buddy," I said. "Come on, hit the road." He looked at me with anger in his eyes, at least until he met my gaze. "You can't tell me what to do," the man said in a slightly squeaky voice. "We're on a date, don't we, Jeannie?" Jeanette just shrugged her shoulders and watched him passively. I reached out with my free hand, grabbed his balls, and whispered in his ear again, this time with unconcealed anger in my voice. "If you don't back off in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to rip off your tiny tool and shove it down your throat," I whispered, and squeezed him hard, a motion that made him gasp and his eyes bulge before I released him and stepped aside to let him out of the stall. "You're not worth getting hurt over," he said to Jeanette as he ran away. Comfortably making room, I sat down across from Jeanette. We just stared at each other, wondering who was going to melt the ice. Naturally, she was the first to do it. "You've always had a flair for the dramatic," she said. "Maybe if you'd been so determined 15 years ago, we'd still be together." "No, I became that way because of what you did to me," I said, then nodded toward her empty glass. "The usual?" "Sure. I haven't changed that much," she said. So I called the waitress over and ordered Jeanette a gin and tonic and myself another Bud Light. I was dangerously close to my self-restraint, but at that moment I didn't care. "You look good, Jason. Really good," Jeanette said with some warmth. "Thank you," I said. After we moved in, I went to the gym and got serious about getting in shape. I decided that I would never be second best again. "Jason, you were never second best," she said with a pained expression on her face. "You're the only man I've ever loved or will ever love. You will never be second best in my heart." "But not in your pussy?" I said bitterly, and then decided not to go down that path. "I'm sorry, Jeanette, that was inappropriate." "No, it's okay, I deserved it," she said. "I loved you, and I still do. But there are demons in my soul that need to be fed. As long as you were always there to take care of me, I could fight them off. But when you started traveling..." An awkward silence enveloped us as we both allowed unwanted memories to surface in our minds. Finally, I asked the one question I'd been pondering since she walked through the door. "Are you working tonight?" I said. Jeanette sort of grinned, confirming my suspicions about her work. She also knew a lot about booze and pot. I was a pretty addicted beer drinker at the time, but never really into drugs, although I was familiar enough with them to know what to do when someone passed me a joint. But I took Jeanette to a New Year's Eve party, and there the joints were pretty regular. Around 10 o'clock we were drunk as hell, and Jeanette pulled me into an empty bedroom, locked the door, and started undressing. "I want you, Jason," she purred. "I've wanted you since the first day you came to the store, and now you're here." That night we slept together for the first time. We finished up, got dressed, and were back at the party well before midnight. At the time, I never stopped wondering how an 18-year-old high school girl learned how to have sex like that. But I soon learned that Jeanette had learned many things they don't teach in high school. My brother Jeff was the same age as Jeanette, and although they went to different schools, different stories go around. And after it started to seem like I was getting serious about her, he took me aside during spring break and told me some of the things he'd heard about her. The story was that she had fucked just about every guy worth a tick at her school, and many of the guys from some of the other schools in town. I should have taken Jeff's concerns more seriously, but I was already hopelessly in love and wasn't inclined to give much credence to salacious rumors. I asked Jeanette about it, and she said she dated a lot, and yes, she had sex with a lot of her boyfriends, but most of those things were simply not true. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, and honestly, I really think she genuinely loved me and enjoyed sex with me. I have no idea if she was faithful to me that spring when I was in college and she was in high school. If not, I never found out. So I have no reason to think she wasn't. Jeanette wasn't cut out for college, so after graduating from high school, she went to work at a department store in the town where I was in college, and we moved into an apartment together. We got married a year later, and after I graduated from college, I got a job with a company based in our hometown. Maybe if we had settled elsewhere, things might have worked out differently, but I doubt it. Jeanette was a time bomb that I think would have exploded wherever she ended up. The fact that it was in our hometown only made it easier. We'd been married for 2 years. 2 blissfully happy years, I might add, when Jeanette got pregnant with Jamie. Jeanette wasn't too happy about it. I had to talk her into giving up birth control and trying to start a family. After all, she did it because she wanted to make me happy. But it was a difficult pregnancy and a painful birth, so even from the beginning there was a bit of a barrier between her and Jamie. Jeanette was by no means neglectful or cruel, but there just wasn't the affection you'd expect between mother and daughter. So there was no doubt in anyone's mind that Jamie was Daddy's little girl, and perhaps that drove a little wedge between Jeanette and me. However, things only started to fall apart, without my knowledge, when Jamie was about 3 years old. I got a promotion and had to travel a lot. I later found out that Jeanette started leaving me after about 8 or 9 months when she met an old high school boyfriend who somehow came back into her life. He apparently brought her back to a drug-addicted, hypersexualized lifestyle, and you already know the rest. After that horrible night, I took steps to kick Jeanette out of my house, which she didn't fight. I hired an investigator to find out her activities over the previous 6 months. Jeanette tried to get me to sit down and listen to what she had to say, and the judge eventually advised me to seek counseling. But it didn't really make any sense. Whether she wanted to or not, Jeanette humiliated me in my hometown, and it was more than I could take. I got custody of Jamie as part of the divorce proceedings and found another job in a town about 100 miles from my hometown. Jeanette visited Jamie once a month, but that didn't last long. I found out that one weekend when Jamie was home, one of her boyfriends came over. They started smoking pot and ended up hooking up while Jamie was left to her own devices in the living room. At least they went into the bedroom and closed the door, but that's when I found out that Jeanette often did the same thing while we were still married, before I found out she was cheating on me. In any case, after that, Jeanette's visitation rights to the child didn't matter. I accepted a transfer to the town where I am now, a few states away from my old hometown, and quietly rebuilt my life. Would I have gone through with it, shot Jeanette, shot myself, and killed myself if Jamie hadn't intervened when she did? I think I would have. In hindsight, I can say it sounds so incredibly selfish, but I was so utterly devastated at that moment that I saw no future and no hope. But I didn't, and all I had to do was pick up the pieces and move on. The convention ended with lunch, then I packed my bags and prepared to move out. I felt a deep need to see Kathy, her soothing touch to the raw emotions that meeting Jeanette had exposed. As I checked out, the porter handed me a heavy paper envelope and told me that a woman had left it for me earlier that morning. I waited until I got on the plane before opening it. Inside was a 1-page letter with my name on it and a thick sealed envelope with Jamie's name on it. I opened the letter addressed to me and couldn't help but smile when I saw Jeanette's distinctive handwriting. "Dear Jason," the letter said, "it meant a lot to me just to hear you say you don't hate me. God knows you have every right to hate me for what I've done. It sounds like you did a wonderful job raising Jamie, but I expected nothing less. I always knew you'd be a great father, and deep down I always knew I'd be a lousy mother, even though I tried. I don't know if she even remembers me or not, and that's okay. Your new wife was a bigger mom to her than I was, and I have no right to intrude on her life. But I did want to communicate with her a little bit. So I wrote her a long letter telling her some things about my life and why we broke up. I want you to save it and give it to her right before she gets married. Maybe if she reads about the terrible mistakes I made, she won't follow in my footsteps. I believe she will act wisely in choosing a husband. And I want her to realize that when you have a good man in your home, you should treat him like a king and make him the first man in your life. I forgot that and threw away the best thing that ever happened to me. Take care of yourself and please give Jamie my love. Love, Jeanette." Kathy and the boys, Bobby and Philip, were waiting in the arrivals hall when I got off the plane. Jamie couldn't make it because she had an exam the next morning, but she will be home for the weekend. I cannot overemphasize how much Kathy Riley saved my life. I met her while she was filling out a pre-employment questionnaire at a substance abuse center where I sought outpatient help after my then-boss gave me an ultimatum: get treatment or get a new job. It was the culmination of my alcoholic phase, a phase I had fallen into in the 3 years since my divorce. Kathy is tall and slender with a narrow waist and small breasts. She is completely black Irish, with dark hair that she wears quite short. Her best features are definitely her expressive brown eyes and her charming smile. When Katie smiles, the whole room lights up, and it reflects her relentlessly optimistic nature. She knew I was concerned about something because I was awfully quiet on the way home. Oh, I listened and carelessly commented while the boys told me about their week. But as they fell asleep in the back seat, I just stared out the window in silence. Katie knew better than to push for answers because she knew I would open up to her like I always did when I was ready. Once we were home, I tucked the boys into bed, then set my suitcase by the closet and methodically undressed. Katie was in the bathroom doing her nightly ritual with the door open, humming a tune while I lay on the bed in just my underwear. I ran into Jeanette last night and we got to talking, I said without preamble. Oh, Katie said, sticking her head out of the bathroom door. Any particular reason why now all of a sudden? I just happened to run into her, I said. She was there, on business, and I had a couple beers to relax. I doubt it was entirely by chance, Katie said. I imagine she jumped at the chance to see you and maybe clear the air. I would have. How many beers have you had? 4, I said openly. I was awfully close to just shitting myself, but I didn't. It was pretty emotionally draining. Then you probably needed it, Katie said. And I believe you need some of it too. I smiled as Katie smoothly crossed the room and turned off the overhead light, leaving the room bathed in the soft light of the bedside lamp. All the way across, she lightly stroked her breasts through the material of her nightgown. She was wearing my favorite silky, tight-fitting, strappy nightgown that just covered her ass. It wasn't see-through at all, but because of the material, it emphasized every curve of her supple body, especially her B-cup breasts. Her eyes glistened, and her perfect teeth shone white as she smiled that special smile that made me want her almost from the first time I met her. She climbed onto the bed from the footboard and settled between my legs. You just lie on your back and let Dr. Katie take care of you, she said quietly. However, just when I thought I was in a good place, a vision of Jeanette the night I caught her cheating came before my eyes, and for the first time in years, I felt the same red haze descend on my soul. I had been such an idiot. I had married Jeanette knowing her background, knowing a little about her past, knowing her blatantly carnal nature. I had been warned, but until that awful night when I came home early and found her cheating on me with someone else, I thought our love had overcome all that. It always pissed me off when I thought about it, and at the beginning of our relationship I took most of my anger and frustration out on Katie. There was nothing hurtful about it. Then I looked at her face and I burst into tears again, and I cried like I hadn't cried since the night I took my daughter and left the woman who was still the great love of my life. And I felt ashamed. Katie just pulled me to her and held me while I spilled it all out. Like her, I realized that while Jeanette may have been my first great love, I was better off with the best woman in the world, and I was a fool to pine for what I had lost years ago, and maybe what I didn't have in the first place. With that thought, I calmed down and kissed Kathy hard. I love you, Kathy, I said with deep feeling. Thank you for your understanding. It was hard to see her again. I thought I was done with it all, but seeing her and finally talking to her made me remember everything again. I'm sorry if I took it out on you. You don't deserve that. What did I tell you when we first got close? Katie said quietly. I can never completely remove Jeanette from your heart, but you have a big enough heart to make enough room for me. Honey, she broke my heart. I don't want her there. Not after all this time, I said almost desperately. You're the one I want. You're the one who deserves all of my heart, not just part of it. Jason, listen to me, Katie said firmly. You can't change the past. You loved her, and she gave you a beautiful little girl, and she needs a place in your heart. That's one of the things I love about you. You have an infinite capacity to love. We have a life together that looks forward, and I love what we have. But you can't just bury the past, so don't even try. I do love you really, really much, I whispered, feeling sleep finally take over me. Katie reached over to turn off the lamp, then wrapped her arms around me in her comforting embrace as I slipped into unconsciousness. 4 years had passed since the night I'd last seen Jeanette. In just an hour or so, Jamie will be married to a fine young man she met in college. He is madly in love with her, and she is absolutely crazy about him. She works as a psychologist in a neighboring school district, and he is studying to be a nurse practitioner. Hey, don't laugh. It's a very lucrative field, and they don't live too far away from us in a medium-sized town. I'm sitting alone in a small alcove of the large Catholic church of which Kathy and I have been members since our own marriage. I have Jeanette's letter in my hand, and I'm weighing whether or not to give it to her. What could she say to the daughter she effectively abandoned so many years ago? What could she say that would break a little girl's heart? A heart that longed for her mother during those long years when it was just the two of us. Unfortunately, Jeanette can't say it in person. She was murdered 2 years ago, killed in a filthy motel room by some psycho customer. I went to the funeral, but Jamie refused to go. It was then that I discovered all the hidden bitterness she still carried about what Jeanette had done to us. Through counseling, both from a professional and from Kathy, she was able to get rid of most of that bitterness. Still, I wonder how she will receive a posthumous message from the woman who caused us all so much pain. Finally, I make a decision. For what it's worth, Jeanette was still Jamie's mother, and I believe she wanted to make amends as best she could. It was the least I could do for the woman who first won my heart, no matter what she did to it. "Honey, can I talk to you for a second in private?" I say, entering the bustle of that bride's room where Jamie, her maids of honor, and stepmother are fussing as the time approaches. "Of course, Daddy, what's the matter?" Jamie says as she joins me outside the room. "Your mother, Jeanette, wanted me to give this to you before you got married," I say as I hold out the letter to her. "Please read it with an open mind. Do it for me. Please. If looks could kill, I'd be mortally wounded. First-time brides should not wear the kind of humiliating look of contempt that appears on my daughter's face when I mention her mother." But as she reads the letter, Jamie's features soften, turning into the young woman I'm used to seeing. The playful, kind look of an intelligent, confident person, and I notice 1 or 3 tears rolling down her cheek as she finishes the letter. "She really loved you, didn't she?" Jamie says. "Yes, in her own way, I think she did," I answer, handing her a handkerchief. She wipes her eyes, and we come in together, father and daughter who have experienced a critical moment in time that could have ended in tragedy. "She was such a fool," Jamie finally says, holding me at arm's length. "Yeah, but I was a fool too," I say. "I knew what she was like, and I married her anyway." Then she folds the letter neatly, puts it back in the envelope, and tucks it into a fold of her dress, where I think she can hold it close to her heart. "Come on, Daddy," Jamie says, pulling me into the bride's room. "My real mom is here, and I think we need Mom's help." I laugh then, and with a perplexed look on my face, perplexed but puzzled, the 3 of us hug Katie, which says a lot. Yes, I was once a fool, and the memory still haunts me. But I was lucky enough to get a second chance at love with a woman who deserved it, and with her help I was able to live a happy life again. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice? Not this time.